Good evening, Mayor and members of the City Council. I appreciate you giving us this time this evening. It means a lot to us. Before I begin and really go through the slides that are assigned to myself, I want to do two things. First, I want to just take a heartfelt moment to really thank Sarah Lana, Katie Hahn, and Kin Chin. They really form the core of our Office of Emergency Services. And I have to tell you, since I've joined the City of Berkeley, I've worked hand in hand with them on multiple emergencies and multiple activations. And they just do an amazing job keeping us moving forward, keeping the team together, and absolutely just keeping us on point and on focus. And so, without them, I don't know how all of this would have come together. So I just really want to honestly acknowledge them publicly and acknowledge them to you, Mayor and City Council, because they've just done tremendous work for all of us and have served the community very, very well. When I think about the presentation so far that you've received, I was reflecting on some words that sort of well define our response to date. And some of the words that came to my mind were science, compassion, innovation, determination, and flexibility. And I think as I go through really the rest of this presentation, you're going to see how that helped to infuse each one of the departments and how they've responded to the COVID-19 pandemic. There is no doubt that under the leadership of our tremendous department heads, we've been able to really keep a tremendous amount of services moving forward in the community. And that's really done in a backdrop of fear, uncertainty, and risk. We experience those personally, and we experience those with our families. And the ability for folks to set that aside and come to work every day, whether it was walking into their kitchen or their dining room and turning on their computer, or coming into City Hall or a city facility, was tremendous and worth acknowledgement. So, we've heard a lot about how many businesses have been impacted by the pandemic. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the direct organizational impacts that we've experienced. So, we have gone to a significant amount of resources or services being provided online. And when we talk about our Department of Information Technology, you'll hear firsthand and see firsthand about the tremendous work they did to transition a significant portion of our workforce to remote working. We've come up with new ways of working. So we have gone to staggered schedules, really done in the desire and need to keep our workforce safe. And we've also increased our building cleaning, our sanitation, and have worked hard to ensure that we have adequate ventilation systems for our employees. As many of you have seen coming through many of our city facilities, we now have installed plexiglass throughout City Hall and through many city facilities in order to keep our employees safe and protected. And all this is done really in a backdrop of a declining budget scenario, and really having to understand how to continue to move forward with less resources. Next slide, please. So some of the other impacts we've experienced, and some of this you've seen and some of this you haven't seen, but this really sort of reflects the reality of that all of us have experienced direct and firsthand. So as you on the council, and as us as well, we've had to learn how to juggle our job duties while taking care of our family members, as well as providing our education to our children. I am lucky that my daughter has now left the home and has entered college, but I do have a deep, profound appreciation for anyone who has been trying to balance that. It is a tremendous amount of work, and I honor that very much. There's the practicalities that for many folks, they weren't working from home. We did not have a workforce that was doing a lot of telecommuting prior to this pandemic. And so the reality sort of really set in of learning how to deal with spotty connections, not a lot of bandwidth, or just the practicality of not having the right workplace setup that can make for longer days. And I will say the days were long. So, in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the amount of the workforce that was really shifted and allocated to the response. But what I can tell you is it doesn't reflect all the hours that has gone into this. folks were working late days, late nights, and countless weekends to really help push forward. Next slide, please. So, one of the questions that we get asked is, how many folks have been assigned to the EOC? And, we tried to really help quantify that for City Council and the community. And the chart that we were able to produce is the chart in front of you, which shows about 550 employees. But what I can tell you is that this is far from really the number and an adequate representation of all the employees that have been really united, marshaled, and working towards this pandemic. How we produced this table for you really quite simply is by taking all the folks that have filled out FEMA forms, we call them Form 214s, and have spent some time on the response between January and July of this calendar year. But there are many folks, including your city manager, who, frankly, didn't fill out one of these forms. It is not because she did anything wrong. It's because her work is not FEMA reimbursable. This is what she signed up for. So what I can tell you is that there are folks throughout the organization that do not show up on this table who we absolutely honor and appreciate for their work day in and day out to really help us be prepared and respond to the pandemic. Next slide, please. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to transition and talk about each one of our departments. And, in doing this, again, I do really want to acknowledge our tremendous department head team who really did a fabulous, fabulous job of leading their employees through a great time of uncertainty, which was heightened with the first shelter-in-place order and continues to this very day, as obviously we have not ended the spread of COVID-19. So first I'll talk about our city attorney's office. And so it's really hard for me to imagine anything that we've done since the very beginning of this pandemic that did not go through our city attorney's office. And you can see on this slide here, just all the different areas in which they have been involved. And it's from the simplest of questions to the most complex of legal questions that we have had to engage them. And I'm so grateful for all their work. They have been there hand in glove, helping our health officer, Dr. Lisa Hernandez, prepare each one of those health officer orders. They've been there really with you, Mayor and City Council, helping you to implement and develop really great policy and legislation to help this community through the pandemic. They've been there helping us do a lot of just very straightforward implementation activities, putting together our respite sites. They've devoted team members to our cost recovery effort. They've helped us bring forward our Healthy Streets program. Nothing that we have done to date, I can say, has been done without the tremendous help and support of our city attorney's office. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about our city auditor's office. So there are a couple of very specific ways in which they have been tremendously helpful to us. So Berkeley, not unlike any other municipality or municipal entity throughout the state, or for that matter, likely throughout the country, is experiencing tremendous financial stress from the pandemic. And I really appreciate and honor the work of the city auditor's office very early on, helping to really frame that challenge in front of us and producing a fabulous report that we leaned on and relied on as we were preparing our budget. In addition to that, our city auditor had staff available to us in a number of different functions in the response, particularly our cost recovery efforts, where their work was just tremendous in helping us frame a great foundation for our cost recovery effort that is moving forward. Next slide, please. So if I had to pick an image for this slide, which is not on here because I wasn't going to be quite so silly for this presentation, I'd put Harry Potter on here. And I say that because what our city clerk did going from in-person meetings to becoming the Zoom wizard literally overnight is tremendous. And really, if you think about it, and I'm not sure if this is actually factually correct, but what I will say, it was certainly a very busy legislative session in the spring and summertime. We got a tremendous amount of work done with you. And I have to give a lot of credit to Mark and his team in helping push through agenda after agenda, and keeping us going day in and day out, really on a whole new platform that we had never explored prior to this pandemic. Not only that, his office was able to quickly transition this election. This is the first election I think probably has ever been accomplished where City Hall has been closed to the public. They've been able to provide a high level of service to each one of the candidates, and I think, as we all know, there are a number of items on this ballot, both candidates running as well as measures in front of the community, and they've done a tremendous job keeping us moving forward, keeping folks well informed, and keeping the process moving forward. It's very much appreciated. In addition to that, the city clerk in his office have launched the redistricting commission. And I will say that if we were not in pandemic mode, you would have been tremendously impressed with the outreach campaign that they had for the community. Unfortunately, plans had to change, and Mark and his team quickly transitioned to a whole new way of getting the word out about the commission and moving that forward so that we'll be able to, once we get the census results, start our redistricting process early next year. Next slide, please. So the city manager's office consists of a number of different divisions, and we've talked a lot about the work of our Office of Economic Development, because really hand in glove with this health disaster is an economic disaster. But I also want to talk about some of the areas of the city manager's office that have been impacted by the pandemic, and I've just done a tremendous job really changing operations to make sure that things can move forward. So I, as like probably many of you on the city council and hopefully watching from home, am a pet owner. I have 2 wonderful dogs. I love them dearly. And it was really wonderful to see our animal services unit transition from really into a fostering model for the community to keep our animals safe. And also, I'm sure, is a wonderful gift and an opportunity for those who are the foster parents. I could not get through this presentation without really providing a tremendous amount of gratitude to our budget office. So Teresa Berkeley Simmons, Rama Murti, Michelle Rossetti. It is unbelievable the amount of work that they had to put together in a short time. Literally, within weeks, within months, the budget that we had adopted just last year completely evaporated, and we were facing an unprecedented budget deficit. And so they literally condensed what would easily take months to produce and work through with departments and with the city council. They did it in weeks, and they did it in a transparent way, and they helped to really land a budget that felt effortless, but I can tell you behind the scenes took countless hours. And so I'm just in great gratitude to all the work that they did. We also have code enforcement in the city manager's office. And, if you think about it, on any given day, our code enforcement team has a tremendous amount of work to do on its own. But they've had to learn how to expand their work and really get into new areas that they had never thought of before. And really that is all around enforcing our health officer orders. Our code enforcement team has done a fabulous job working with businesses, working with residents to help them understand what the health officer orders are about. And as we move forward, to help enforce in the most sensitive and compassionate way possible so that we can really be successful in helping to curb the spread of the pandemic. And I think their support and partnership with the EOC, with our Department of Health, Housing, and Community Services has clearly produced some great fruit as we have done a great job, as Katie mentioned earlier in the presentation. Next slide, please. So obviously a tremendous partner to our budget office is our finance department. And under leadership of our finance director, our finance department was really on top of the information that we needed to know in order to produce a budget for this community and understand the resources that we had available. And what is particularly striking to me is the attention and detail that they really brought forward to make sure that we were well informed. So as you can see on this slide, our finance department developed what they call the Fiscal Analysis Working Group. And what this was all about was getting detailed information from any possible source that they could, both locally, regionally, throughout the state, throughout the country in order to give us the best possible estimates of the resources we would have available. With that being said, there is no doubt that there's nothing that we can do without paying bills, without making resources available. And our finance department did a tremendous job making sure that folks had the information at their ready in order to make purchases, in order to have the resources available to get stuff done. And so I'm very grateful for all the work that they did. They were also incredibly creative and innovative in making sure that we could continue to move forward with many important capital projects for the community. They innovated the way we take bids so that they can be done in a safe way to keep our employees safe, as well as to keep those who are bidding on projects safe. Next slide, please. So our Office of Emergency Services falls under the Fire Department, and I think that we've done a great job really tonight highlighting really the value that our Office of Emergency Services bring forward. I also want to talk about the Fire Department itself and some of the great work that they've done. And one of the really big shining stars in their response has been the Mobile Integrated Paramedic Unit. So this is a really innovative model that they brought forward very early on in the pandemic to help work with non-critical patients in order to provide them the services that they needed so they wouldn't end up in the hospital. And this was really, really important if you think about the early days of the pandemic when we were very worried about hospital capacity and and overloading our emergency rooms. And they came up with a system and a model to really help us provide tremendous service to the community, and also thinking about the back end, which is the hospital system, and keeping it free to help treat those with COVID-19. In addition to that, our fire department has been incredibly helpful in making sure that folks know how to wear their N95 masks. I believe the statistic is they've helped fit over 400 individuals in how to wear this important PPE. Next slide, please. So the next department is our Health, Housing, and Community Services Department. They have been central, absolutely central, to managing ourselves through this pandemic. And if there is one person within the department that bears a tremendous amount of acknowledgement and celebration and appreciation, it's Dr. Lisa Hernandez. So I can tell you, I remember very clearly, I believe it was March 15th or March 16th, being on a call late on a Sunday night with our city manager, our public health officer, our city attorney, deputy city manager Paul Budenhagen, and we were on a call talking about the first shelter-in-place order. And I can absolutely tell you that the conviction, the leadership that she brought forward to help take us into that moment and to take us from that moment to where we are today is something that I can barely put into words. She has been a tremendous partner to all of us in the organization, and she has done a fabulous job helping this community navigate something that we haven't seen in the past 100 years. So I just want to really offer to you, Mayor, and to the City Council my profound appreciation for her and all that she's done today to get us to where we are. There are so many things that the Department of Health, Housing, and Community Services has done. You heard both from Sarah and from Katie, really all the work that they've done. And this slide really is just sort of, the tip of everything that they're providing to the community. They're managing a disease containment unit. And when you hear disease containment unit, you should think about contact tracing. They're managing our testing program. They're working with our most vulnerable, those who are living out on the street, are unhoused, our seniors. They're ensuring that they have the resources that they have to be safe. They're expanding housing for the community, not only in direct response to COVID-19, but bringing forward long-standing programs that are so dearly important to this community, like the Affordable Housing Project on Berkeley Way. They're providing critical physical and mental health services to our most vulnerable, and they're doing this with the absolute highest level of compassion that I can see from any person. They are so committed to what they do, and I'm so grateful to be a part of this team and to see them in action day in and day out. Next slide, please. Human resources. it is impossible for me to think of what we could do getting ourselves through this pandemic without our human resources department. And I mean that with the utmost sincerity. So our team has been able to take in so many new pieces of legislation and regulation and translate them into action that kept our employees safe, that helped us to understand what the new laws are and what they mean to us. They were on the forefront of meeting with our union leadership, maybe not always agreeing from the get-go, but coming to a common understanding and being absolutely responsive to their requests. They have provided tremendous training to our organization and tilted up a tremendous website that provides a wealth of information, not only about new policies that never existed prior to the pandemic, but also to provide tips on how to keep each one of ourselves safe and healthy. And I think it goes without saying that their work has absolutely been impeccable. Next slide, please. So the Department of Information Technology really consists of, if you think about it at its core, two different functions. So we've got the technology side, and then we've got 311. And I want to talk a little bit about the technology side. So there's really two aspects to that I want to touch on. One is our employees themselves. So there is no doubt, for those of you that have been down to the Department of Information Technology, you know they worked in a very cramped environment. And they have learned how to adapt in a remote working environment to provide a high level of service to this organization in order to keep themselves safe. In addition to that, they have done a tremendous job serving each and every one of us. So as I mentioned before, and as you've heard, our organization was not terribly high in using remote working or telecommuting. Somehow, some way, in the blink of an eye, they were able to get up to 700 employees with the capacity and capability to work from home. It was a bit rough at first, and they adapted, introduced new technologies to not only allow us to be productive, but to keep us safe. There's a statistic, I believe, in the report that says something like the number of cybersecurity attacks over the course of this pandemic is something like 300 to 800% higher, depending upon what resource you look to. And while we have not been hacked as an organization, we have software providers that we work with who have been, and we know how devastating it can be. Our Department of Information Technology has been ever vigilant in making sure that we are as safe as we can possibly be so that we can continue to deliver service. I also could not get past this slide without talking about our 311 crew. They are on the front lines of taking in calls and emails from the community. And the team that Kathy Cassidy leads is just doing a tremendous, tremendous job responding to email after email as it comes in and responding to each and every call that comes in. And they go the extra mile. And let me give you a specific example. So I remember specifically when we were very early on in the pandemic and personal services weren't open. So barbers, hair salons, etc. And there was a moment when that obviously changed and the health officer order allowed them to occur. And I remember speaking with Kathy because she had been in contact with many of those businesses, and her team reached out to every single one of them, as far as I know, to reach out to them and let them know that they would be able to open. That's a high level of personal service that you just don't see. And I'm very grateful for them taking the time, effort, and attention to really deliver that to our community, because it's well deserved. Next slide, please. So Katie mentioned the library. So it's just amazing when we come together as a team, the kind of relationships that you form and the ways in which we get to work together. So as we all know, the libraries were closed for an extended period of time, and the community felt that because our libraries are a very valuable resource to all of us. But what I have to say is that every single one of those individuals on this slide right here was absolutely instrumental into our response. And I know our new executive director has joined us, and prior to that, it was Elliot Warren. And Elliot was just a tremendous partner to all of us. He helped bring forward folks who work at the library to work in the EOC, to work with 311, to receive training on managing a shelter. There was nothing you could throw at the library that they wouldn't do. And I'm just so very grateful for their selflessness in helping us move the organization and the community forward through the pandemic. I absolutely can say we could not have done it without them. Next slide, please. So Parks, Recreation, and Waterfront. There's so many things that they have been involved in and immersed in throughout this pandemic. So as you know, our Parks, Recreation, and Waterfront department, they've got their hands in a lot of different activities. So they are managing very important capital projects for us. And that's really important for me to point out because the list of projects that they have on their plate is pretty long. And it's pretty long because of the generosity of the community in improving Measure T1. And even though there was a pandemic, they were under a tremendous amount of pressure to move projects forward, not only in order to be compliant with existing bond regulations, but also to keep folks safe on the job site. And they did a tremendous job staying focused on that and keeping those projects moving forward. In addition to that, they were a tremendous partner throughout the response. So you can see on this slide the kind of work that they did. So we had folks out in parks day in and day out throughout the community, providing postcards with information about the importance of staying 6 feet apart, wearing face coverings, washing your hands, and also distributing face coverings. It was a core part of their work. They also were instrumental in really providing accurate intelligence throughout the community in terms of how we're doing with our compliance with our health officer orders. And they found really unique ways of keeping service, really core community service on the forefront of their minds. So you can see right here on this slide, the drive-in movie theater that they offered. They also found a way to really change the way that they do business to provide very critical care for our youth throughout the community and doing it in a safe and outdoor environment. So kudos to the Parks, Recreation, and Waterfront Department for all that they did through this pandemic. Next slide, please. Our Planning and Development Department, they have been incredibly productive throughout this pandemic. You can see some of the statistics on this slide. Initiated 3,500 building permits, issued 2,400 permits, including revisions and deferrals, processed 15 to 20 plan submittals and resubmittals, and completed 4,000 cashiering transactions. But what I also would really like to highlight for you, Mayor, and the City Council is the work that they were doing behind the scenes to keep us moving. So they were able to go from building inspections in person to really being very flexible and providing building inspections in a remote platform. They used various technologies to get us there, and that really enabled folks to continue to move their construction projects forward. In addition to that, they were absolutely critical. If all of us can remember, it feels like a long time ago, but there was a time when actually construction was halted in the community. And when it was allowed to continue, it really had to be done in a very safe way. And our health officer spent a lot of time putting together really the types of protocols that are necessary to ensure that folks would be safe on the job. And our Planning and Development Department was critical in implementing those health officer orders, providing education to the construction community. They provided a webinar to them to help explain, being on site to help make sure that all of our rules and regulations are being followed. And so it was a tremendous lift for them in order to do all that work, particularly in an environment that was completely unknown. And so I'm very grateful for all that they did to keep us moving forward. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of our police department and a few things that I want to call out. One is our police department has been a tremendous partner in making sure that our community is safe. So that's a picture of an individual, and they were empowered to hand out masks throughout the community. And that was really important to us because it's been really critical to us as we've moved through this pandemic to make sure that folks have the resources at hand to keep themselves safe. And so it's really important to have the police department really be partners for us in that effort. Another area that I want to call out that really is tied to their connection and bond to the fire department is that a couple of our officers received training what we would call our Department Infection Control Officers. And so they were specifically trained to work with employees in their department for contact tracing, for COVID-19 monitoring, and making sure that folks were safe. And if there was any concerns or issues, that they knew exactly what to do to make sure that our employees were well taken care of. Next slide, please. Our Public Works Department has been part of our response in so many different ways. It's really hard to put it all together for you in one simple slide. So we know day in and day out, they were core to keeping just really important services moving forward. Solid waste, zero waste services, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 5 days a week, they were out on the street making sure that our garbage was picked up. Specifically in response to the pandemic, these photos here help to summarize and demonstrate some of the ways that they were so important to us. So you see on the top left there, you got a picture of one of our trailer sites. Our Public Works Department was critical in helping to set up those sites and get them ready so that those trailers could be habitable. Throughout many of our city facilities, they have brought forward over 30 different hand sanitization stations that you can see, both standalone as well as mounted on our walls. They've installed plexiglass throughout our city facilities, all designed to make the workplace as safe as possible. Also, what was very important was they help us to tilt up our local receiving, storage, and staging. And so that has been critical to us because that has been really the key area where we have accepted supplies and donations from the community, but also our logistics functions within our EOC has been able to track, keep inventory, as well as to well stock and supply our organization with valuable PPE. Next slide, please. So the last department that I'll talk about is the Rent Stabilization Board. And so they absolutely have been an important partner to us throughout this pandemic because we've talked about the impacts to our businesses. We have obviously talked about the health impacts of the pandemic, and there have been tremendous impacts to our renters throughout the community. So unfortunately, many folks have been in difficult situations. Some have lost income, some have lost jobs. And so our Rent Stabilization Board has absolutely been on the forefront of working directly with our renters, directly with our landlords, and making sure that they understand what are the new regulations, not only adopted locally, but at the state level and at the federal level. And you can just see on this slide a summary, a really good summary of all that they've done to make sure that the community is well informed and has all the information at their fingertips in order to stay safe and stay housed. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we were asked to do as part of the referral from City Council was to take a step back and to think about some of the lessons learned as we've gone through and navigated our way through this pandemic. And I have to say that, you know, this is really just sort of a first pass at, I think, many of the lessons that we've learned in going through this. And I say that because we know, as well as everyone knows, that we're not out of the woods yet, and that we have a long way to go before we get to the other end of this pandemic. But as we take a moment and reflect about really where we are and really what we've learned in these 6, 7, 8 months of managing this crisis, I want to share some of that with you. So one of the things, obviously, that we have learned is how to work remotely and telecommute. And that's a really big change in an organization where it's not really common and part of our normal discourse. So we have learned how to develop new ways of supervising, working together, new ways of scheduling meetings so that we can actually get up and get out of our offices. And we've also had to find ways of really keeping ourselves energized, because it's hard to sit in front of a computer all day and all night like that. We've really looked at new technology. So in an organization like ourselves that is very thoughtful and very deliberate, we have realized that we've had to really accelerate and move forward quicker than we otherwise might have to adopt a whole host of new technologies in order to provide services to the community, as well as to ensure that employees can continue to be productive. And I think one of the things that we hope to do, and have had multiple conversations with this within the organization, is to use this as an opportunity to refresh and look at our digital strategic plan and see ways that we can continue to really use some of the technologies we've deployed and could deploy to keep us moving forward. One of the things that happened very early on in the pandemic is that we found new ways of working together. And so one of the things that we did really from day one is we split up sort of the organization and how we manage operations. And so really what our city manager did was make it very clear that our deputy city manager, Paul Budenhagen, would be managing our EOC. And that really provided an opportunity for myself to work directly with our department heads and help to coordinate and facilitate a lot of our department operations. And one of the things that we did was we started meeting quite regularly. We were up to about 3 times a week for about 4, 5, 6 months there. We were meeting on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And we used this time really for a number of different things. One was to make sure that we all had the best possible information. We used it as an opportunity to talk about challenges that each one of us were facing. And we used it as an opportunity to share some of the best practices that we were really learning, not only from our own operations, but also what we were learning from outside of the organization. And it is really proven to be a very effective method for us. And as we've continued to go through this pandemic, we continue to meet regularly. And it's been very helpful for us to keep ourselves dealing with really core critical issues that are in front of us on a daily and weekly basis. And lastly, really, as we've really took a step back and thought about where we are and how we got to where we are, and what has made this response, I think, as great as it has been, is really the emphasis in this organization around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when you pull together an EOC, you're pulling together employees who, on a day-to-day basis, may not have seen each other, may never have worked together, may functionally be in completely different disciplines. And because we have a foundation in this organization of really helping to lead and train and learn how to work with individuals of diverse backgrounds, of diverse cultures, of diverse intellects, it has allowed us to be successful in working together and mobilizing a tremendous response to this pandemic. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Katie Van Dyke, who's going to talk about really our efforts and our energy and attention around building back better. Katie, it's all yours.